That evening, Ford's Theater was lively and full of action. The mood was good, a comedy was being acted out, and there were few signs of an impending struggle. Lincoln, who had actually arrived late, now sat with his wife, Mary Todd, and friends, Major Henry R. Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris, in a booth above the stage. At about 10:15 p.m., John Wilkes Booth crept into the box, which had been recently vacated by Lincoln's bodyguard. At point-blank range, John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln just once in the back of the head with a .44 caliber single-shot Derringer. In the following chaos, Booth attempted to escape, only to be inhibited by Rathbone. In the tussle, Booth managed to stab Rathbone in the shoulder before jumping over the edge of the president's box, dropping many feet before landing on the stage, during which he shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," meaning, "Thus always to the tyrants."
Where is President Lincoln this evening? He's awfully late.
Well, hello there, Major Rathbone.
Oh, hello, President Lincoln.
Sorry to keep you waiting this evening.
That's perfectly fine. Hello, Mrs. Lincoln.
So what exactly is this play called, Rathbone?
Our American Cousin. It's a great comedy.
Ah, it does seem quite funny. And the 40th Theater here is pretty nice.
It is quite nice, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Ah! Oh. Hey, wait a second. Have you seen my bodyguard by chance?
Oh, I think he went to go get a beer or go get a better seat.
Yeah, I suppose so. Well, I wonder. Ah! Sic semper tyrannis! Oh, my leg!
Abraham Lincoln was pronounced dead at 7:22 a.m., April 15, 1865.
He's still alive, but just barely. I don't think he'll make it till morning.
The fatal shot occurred just below the left ear. George Atzerodt was the only co-conspirator not to complete his mission, which was to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson. Lewis Powell, who was to kill Secretary of State William Seward, only managed to tear off William Seward's cheek. As for Booth, he and George Harold escaped and rode horseback 17 miles in 4 hours to Samuel Mudd's house in Maryland. He met Mudd while searching for escape routes for his plan to kidnap Lincoln. Samuel Mudd was a doctor and gave John Wilkes Booth the much-needed medical attention he needed after breaking his left ankle when jumping from the president's theater box. Mudd helped both the fugitives and let them spend the rest of the night at his home. The next morning, realizing the danger he was in, Samuel Mudd forced John Wilkes Booth and David Harold to leave his home. Booth and Harold then left and hid in a pine forest behind the house of a Confederate sympathizer. A man named Thomas Jones, an agent of the Confederate Underground, helped John Wilkes Booth and David Harold from the pine forest off to a boat to cross the Potomac River. However, instead of rowing west to Virginia and the deep South, which was where Booth was trying to run away to, the men rowed the wrong way, and they rowed northwest, and after a full night of rowing, never left Maryland. When daybreak came, the men hid in the reeds of the river. Soon, the fugitives met 3 Confederate soldiers in the small village of Port Conway. The 3 soldiers offered to take the fugitives to the farmhouse of Richard Garrett, where they were introduced as Confederate soldiers just back from the war. This was near the date of April 21st. At this time, a train was departing from Washington, D.C., on its way to Springfield, Illinois. On board the train were the remains of President Abraham Lincoln and his 12-year-old son, who had died years earlier from tainted water. The funeral train made its way through the United States, making stops so that people of the United States could pay their respects to the fallen president. Union soldiers had been looking for Booth since Lincoln's assassination, and soon caught one of the Confederate soldiers who escorted John Wilkes Booth and David Harold to the Garrett farm, and forced him to reveal the whereabouts of John Wilkes Booth. Union soldiers soon arrived at Garrett farm. They then went to the tobacco barn in which the fugitives were hiding. David Harold surrendered when the Union soldiers arrived, but Booth did not. The Union soldiers then set the tobacco barn on fire with John Wilkes Booth still in it. When Booth fled from the burning building, he was shot by a young officer by the name of Boston Corbett. Booth was still alive but badly wounded. He could barely speak, but he asked to see his hands. Looking at his hands, his last words were useless, useless.
No! I surrender! Set it on fire! Useless. Useless.
On May 12th, 8 defendants stood trial for the murder of President Abraham Lincoln. David Harold, George Atzerodt, and Lewis Powell were sentenced to death. Mary Surratt, who owned the boarding house where the conspirators sometimes met, and who only had knowledge of the kidnapping plan, also received a death sentence, and became the first female to be executed by the federal government. Michael O'Laughlin, Samuel Arnold, and Samuel Mudd were sentenced to life in prison under hard labor. On May 3rd, President Lincoln and his son had made it to their final resting place on the outskirts of Springfield, Illinois, in a cemetery called Oak Ridge.
It's a comedy.
What's this called again?
No.
Ah! Where are you now?
There is Mr. Lincoln.
Not yet. Oh, sorry.
Oh, hello.
I forgot her name. Well, hello there, Major Aston.
Oh, hello, President Lincoln.
Sorry to keep you waiting this evening.
That's perfectly fine. Hello, Mrs. Lincoln. She's actually so happy here.
Yeah, they are. I wonder what their names are.
I don't know.
Huh, yeah. I wonder where my bodyguard went.
Just barely. I don't.